Chapter 18. Cloak and Dagger in the Snow. Scalded cats fear even cold water. Thomas Fuller. Clever Ed had forced Ricky to pack light, only what he could put in a carry-on. This meant both men left the U.S. Embassy in Yakutsk wearing half they packed and what they'd gained, namely several pair of gloves, large coats, and large hats. With the cold, it was hardly an impediment. Errol walked them to the puttering old Soviet cab, making clouds in the street ahead. It was sunny, which did diminish the bite of the cold, but not in any way Ricky could determine. Errol shook Ed's hand and held it for a moment, meeting his eye. Then he shook Ricky's and did the same. Everyone smiled and waved, and the FBI men got in the back of the cab. Both looked in their mittens. Ricky had a dark business card matching the color of his glove. On the back was written, "No airport. Destroy card." Clever Ed had a thumb drive with "one time" written on the side. He looked at Ricky. Ricky showed him the card briefly, then began ripping it up. About that time, the cabbie leaned back from the driver's seat. "Airport!" "Actually, I think we need a bite to eat before we fly around the world," Clever Ed said. "What's the quietest sit-down joint you know?" The cabbie smiled and repeated, "Airport!" "Нет," Ricky jumped in. "Хочу есть." And he mimed eating. "Oh, da, yes, good, I know place." And he turned back around. The cabbie took them to the busiest spot he could think of downtown. Clever Ed tipped big, and both men brought their bags with them as the driver was dismissed. Eddie and Ricky disappeared into the crowd and spent a few minutes getting lost before Ed hailed another cab, and they managed to find their way to a hole-in-the-wall bar that was essentially empty. In a corner booth near an exit providing both men walls they could put behind their backs, Ricky and Ed booted up the thumb drive. As soon as it swam into visibility on Ricky's laptop, a pop-up indicated a 2-minute timer. Ricky minimized it and looked at the files. It was a headline regarding the crash of a regional flight from Yakutsk. The date was the following morning. The headline was from a major news outlet. The flight was the one Ricky and Ed were supposed to be on. The flash drive began to blink, and as it did so, the image of tomorrow's headline disappeared, quickly replaced with 2 words that remained on the screen approximately 5 seconds. Machtal 8. Abruptly, there was a metallic smell, indicating the drive had somehow fried itself. Ricky quickly removed it from the laptop, shut the computer down, and put it away. He crushed the thumb drive under his boot and put it in his pocket. Clever Ed looked at him, then put a finger to his lips. Ricky nodded, and then both men about screamed when a little old woman with a serving tray said, "Привет, что ты хочешь?" "No, hi, we do not want any," Ricky started, but Clever Ed hushed him. "Да, два пива, пожалуйста. Конечно." And she went off to get 2 beers. Ed looked at Ricky, then produced a pen and wrote this on a napkin. "Our clothes or bags are probably bugged. Check your stuff first in the bathroom, then I will. You find bugs, leave your phone in the garbage in there. Throw that thumb drive in the same bin. Eat this napkin." Ricky nodded, eating the napkin a few seconds later. Both men checked their things, finished their beers, and left, each without a smartphone. Outside, Ed said, "I found 2. You?" "Same." "Machtal it is then. What time is it?" "Oh, you used your phone too. Good thing I've been wearing this thing all my life." And Ed pulled back his glove to check his wrist. It was bitter cold outside. He looked up. "We got 3 hours to kill." "Is Machtal that one restaurant?" "Yeah, we shouldn't get there early. We don't wait longer than 10 minutes. If he doesn't show, we're going to have to play this by ear. Well, even more than we are now, I suppose." "If who doesn't show?" "Errol, of course. Who else? First things first. We got to get out of this cold. Train station is 2 blocks that way. Let's loop around like madmen to make doubly sure they ain't any tails. Keep up, kid. You get to learn some tradecraft today." "You're no tradecraft, sir." "Ricky?" Clever Ed looked at him over his orange shades, then took them off and smiled. "See? I'm already invisible." The crazy thing is, he was not wrong. A man that wears weird glasses all the time, when he takes them off, he's hard to recognize. Clever Ed was almost never without a pair of his multicolored circle-lensed glasses. So commenced an hour of swift walking through alleys, through crowds, to bus stops, on buses, off buses, through parks, and finally to a spot where the endpoint required a person to double back through a few spots. You could see if anyone was following that way. By the time Ed was sure, they were both fighting off shivers, despite the paranoid energy fueling them. Finally, in the train station, an hour and a half ahead of their visit with Errol at Machtal, Clever Ed said, "Ricky, this might not be Russians after us." "Yes, sir. That article, it was written in English." Both men wore their hoods up, faces recessed within. So did almost everyone else in the station. And they had the same style of clothes. Neither Ed nor Ricky really stood out in any way. Ed turned over his shoulder to face Ricky for a second. They were seated on benches facing opposite directions, and both were watching everybody that came and went as casually and closely as they could manage. Ed never stopped watching passerby in the station as he made eye contact with Ricky briefly. "Listen, I'm sorry. I've been playing the game long enough. I know there are some who, well, let's just say I'm more valuable as a casualty that could be conspiratorially blamed on the Russians than I am as a good agent helping to track down the bad guys. The bad guys took control in our country a long time ago. You ask me, when they shot Kennedy, that was the moment it happened. Well, they had to get away with it after that, true, but they did. Anyway, Ricky, you're screwed too, so sorry." Ricky watched the family make their way to the ticket counter, then begin an argument with a clerk who was not remotely compelled by their emotion. He returned to scanning everyone in the station. He felt a thrill go through him as he internalized what he was about to experience. And at length he said, "How do we know it's a done thing? We go back to the U.S. publicly, they'll make a big deal out of it, make us heroes even, and then they'll wait until they can punch our ticket and make it look like an accident. The sooner the better. Car crashes, heart attacks, there's a lot of ways. From now on, our only option for getting back in America is sneaking in. I suppose it's a good thing there isn't a border in the South anymore. No, this was definitely our guys. It was the Russians. If it was the Russians, well, they'd already have us. The cabbie would have been their guy. They didn't even send one. Honestly, that's a bit suspicious when you think about it. What with this Russian invasion in Ukraine and all. You know how they've been pushing the Russia hoax up top. You'd think they'd want a couple guys like us. You think it is, or was, whoever was tailing us to Maya?" Clever Ed screwed up his face and leaned back on the bench. "They sure didn't know how to deal with the cold, but why follow us at all if they're just going to bring down a plane?" "But those guys definitely weren't Russian," Ricky countered. "So we have two groups with an interest in what we're up to. Remember South Dakota? My money's on those Ake people, but they haven't taken us out yet, and they want to know what we know. Even so, our people want us out. What's going on here? You remember the laptop fiasco?" "Yeah, and Hunter was always dicking around in Ukraine," Clever Ed acknowledged. They couldn't figure out any angles more compelling over the next hour and a half. At length, they made their way to Machtal. It had just gotten dark, and that ushered in a whole new world of cold. Ricky and Ed walked in at 8 o'clock on the button. Errol was in the back of the restaurant. He walked out of the kitchen, looked at them, then walked back in. They followed through the swinging double doors used by the servers. Errol took them out behind the restaurant, and they got in a car. Immediately, he started driving them out of town. Thankfully, the sunshine from the daytime had translated to a night without any additional snow. When they got out of town, Errol said, "You got any bugs? You got all the bugs? You killed the phones?" "We did," said Clever Ed. "Now, what's this about?" "We received communique expressing condolences. We received communique expressing condolences at your passing. We received 1 hour before I call your cab. When I search online, the story is all already out. It is everywhere. It drops 2 hours before communique. You delayed leaving, or I never would have seen. That delay, it might be saving you." "Why are you helping us?" "Because you help stop war," Errol replied. "You are not Biden FBI. This is, well, you cannot really stop the war, конечно. This is too much hope, but maybe you can expose real devils." "Real devils," Clever Ed repeated, twisting his mustache around. Then, "You got solid alibis for all this, Errol?" He was in the front seat and caught Errol's eye. "Yes, and you two, not so smart. Not so smart. Here." He pulled something from an internal pocket. It happened to be a little book, and on its cover was some sort of cylindrical mirror. "I put 2 and 2 together. Maya! Nobody goes to Maya! Ha! May this help. It's deep knowledge, local knowledge. You find it nowhere else. Not internet, nowhere, believe. Your minds. Open them. Many, many lies in the world. Matryoshka dolls. Behind one layer, something else. Remember, okay? We hear. And he parked the vehicle. They'd come to a cabin in the woods, and Errol led them to a car that was running inside a heated garage. He said, I've left instructions for safe house. His bed and breakfast. He's outside my yard. You go there. You regroup. 2 days. Leave north, not the way we came. Come down on other side of the river. Thank you very much, Mr. Errol, sir. Ricky bowed. We owe you one, pal. Clever Ed patted him on the back. Well, just don't let it come back to me. We call it good. It took another 8 hours to make it to the safe house outside Maya. It was likely a safe house because it certainly had no trappings of modern technological infrastructure. It might as well have existed in the 1800s. It was well kept for all that, but thoroughly antiquated. An older woman who was a distant Yakut's relative of Errol had become a fixture in the town. She essentially ran the town and the inn. She spoke no English and kept to herself. In the book was a crude map of the area and an approximation of where Sestra Maya was. From their location at the bed and breakfast, it was a solid 10 miles, or twice that in kilometers. Additionally, the map showed where there was a shortcut to travel on foot to the house from the burnt-out center of town. Beyond these things was a book describing something called the Kozyrev mirror and relating it to the UFO phenomenon quite eagerly. Ricky, this is mostly in Russian. You think you can get through it tonight? I can try, sir. Your Russian is as good as mine. Yeah, but I figure, well, I gotta think a way to sneak back into the U.S. and get our assets without getting noticed. Yes, this will not be easy. It certainly won't, Ed agreed. In the meantime, tell me if anything in that little book can help us tomorrow. I think we're going to get about one shot at this. He looked at the frozen Russian forest out the window and muttered, maybe not even that. Skeeter returned from his third trip through the airport and got in a blue Soviet-era sedan. Rufus sat inside smoking to match the exhaust coming out the back of the old vehicle. Skeeter looked at Rufus. Somebody tipped them off, he said. Who knows we're here? Somebody must know we're here. Or they found something and they're staying behind, Rufus mused. Skeeter shrugged with a non-committal snicker. Could be. It had just gotten dark around the regional airport near Yakutsk. Rufus flicked away his latest cigarette, said, We watched the embassy. One day. To be sure. You think somebody tipped them off at the embassy? Skeeter observed. Somebody knew something, all right. We'll go there in the morning. If they're not at the embassy, then we'll go to Maya. Rufus put the sedan in reverse, pulled out of the spot they were in down the line of cars, and they left the airport. Ricky and Clever Ed hid the car in a vacant area behind a wall that had acted as a snow fence in the remains of Sestra Maya. There was an old apartment complex that was now just a handful of stubborn walls covered in snow. A few other vague ruins poked up through the snow, but unless you knew a town had once been there, these things were impossible to pick out from the forest. It took them several attempts to parse Errol's map. Then they found the place and his shortcut to the Baba Yaga house. Yes, the remains of the town were all covered in snowdrifts, and yes, the old main access, cordoned off by local authorities, was less than drivable. They had made it anyway. The path to the cottage was thick with snow. It took a good hour to cross it. They made it to the Baba Yaga house by around 1 in the afternoon. Snowdrifts covered its western side, but it opened to the east. It had a cinnamon roll shape. There was one wall that stuck out from the structure a little like the opening doughy wrap of the cinnamon roll. You know, there's that. It goes around like that. This was only a few feet off from the front door. The building was trimmed in earthy hues and blended in with the rest of the forest. Clever Ed noticed something right away. Somebody's been here off and on over the years, he remarked, but they never drove. How can you tell? Look over on the north side. See the firewood? Ricky squinted. Oh, yes. That's a good-sized pile for a structure that has been abandoned for almost 8 years. Yeah, also, look at this place. It's not falling apart at all, but no footprints anywhere. Indeed, the cabin looked like a well-kept and healthy part of the forest, albeit a strange circular part of it. The front door was locked, but Clever Ed managed to force it. When they emerged inside, they were pleasantly surprised to find it several dozen degrees warmer. Certainly it was still cold, but apparently the structure was well insulated. It was almost above freezing. Turning to his right, Ed saw a lamp with a dangling handle of some variety. He pulled it, and when he let go, the weighted handle remained dangling and the room was lit up as the gravity lamp slowly drew it back up the string. Haven't seen one of these since I was in Johannesburg. Ed continued walking into the building and found himself wondering at what he saw. Someone is definitely here with regularity, Ricky said. Yeah. Ed walked up to the panels on the walls. He poked one and moved it a little. Some sort of wood or imitation wood. He pulled it back and a man was staring at him. Ed had a start, but it was only his own reflection. What the hell? He muttered. That is polished, said Ricky, followed by, hey, there's a stove in the kitchen. Maybe we'll use it to warm up. I'll get some firewood. Good idea, Ed agreed and went back to the front door where he automatically started kicking snow off his boots before stopping, laughing, and wondering what had possessed him. He entered the first door he came to. It let on a little wedge-shaped room with two more doors, one in front of him at a slight angle, and one to his right, leading to the center room of the space. The one right in front of him had a little closet beside it, which Ed realized probably led into the space which would be the end of the spiral, that jutting wall at the structure's front to the east. He went forward and into the next room. It was a bathroom that likewise had two additional doors from the one he entered by. It had a tub and a shower head against the outside wall, a door toward the center, and one at a slight angle straight ahead. The next room was another three-doored bedroom, followed by a three-doored office, and then he was back in the living room or foyer of the circular house. All 5 rooms had a door to the center of the structure, a 6th room of its own. On whim, Ed went and examined some of the wood partitioning these rooms. It had no metal behind it. The only metal came from the exterior walls and circumference of the house. It was like someone had taken a cross-section of a silo, put scaffolding for rooms in the center, finished the scaffolding to delineate rooms, then put a pointy roof on top of the whole thing. Ricky, meanwhile, found the basement almost immediately after he got a log burning in the structure's central stove. He turned to tell Ed and found him coming from the foyer of the space. Sir, look, there is a basement. Ed followed Ricky's arm, muttering, good idea on the stove, then slowly went to stand over the rail and look down the widely spiraling stairs. Who builds like this? Maybe it's for thermal energy, sir. Using the heat of the earth to reduce energy needs of the structure, sir, like an earthship in New Mexico. I guess anything's possible. Hey! 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 Anybody down there? He looked back at Ricky, then retrieved a flashlight from his backpack and turned it on. Coming down the stairs, he was startled when he accidentally kicked a clear glass cup off the side of the step. It broke on a hard surface below. What was that, sir? Ricky called from above. Somebody left a cup on the stairs, Ed called back. Then he reached the bottom and found another gravity lamp. The whole room lit up. It was surrounded in mirrors, but had a variety of equipment under tarps along the walls, breaking up the reflection. In the center of the room was a thick conglomeration of stone, standing vertically about 6 feet high, and about the same wide. It was an uneven bit of stone, but it was several feet thick and looked relatively stationary. Ricky followed quickly down the stairs. Wow, it is double bright down here. One lamp, said Ed. It's the mirror. Whole room is wrapped in a mirror. Look, even the floor. Ricky suddenly looked surprised. Sir, it's been bothering me since we come in. What has? Ricky pulled his hood back and unzipped his coat, then retrieved the little black book. He turned several pages on the inside, and there was a diagram of a cylinder rolled into a spiral. 1.5 turns, or thereabouts. Look, sir. Ed squinted at the notebook. Then his head snapped back, and he began to look around the house. He looked at the page again. This is describing the supernatural house, Baba Yaga's house, he said. Yes, sir. It says, man, I don't mean Russian, but there's that word, cozy rev. It's, Clever Ed ran up the stairs, and Ricky followed after. Ed started knocking on the walls. He knocked on the exterior walls of the structure, then the interior walls partitioning the rooms. He turned to Ricky. It's one of those mirror things. They covered over everything but the basement for some reason. Okay, so what do we do about that? Well, does that book say how to turn it on? Ricky stared intensely at the book and started carefully sounding out Russian words, at length saying, when the sun comes in through the eastern window, the stone below will start to glow. They rhymed it so it comes out that way in English? Well, that was an accident, but that's what it says, sir, basically. Well, Ricky, here's where we're at. That science kid who disappeared, Paul, Katya, there's some way to go where they went. This thing is a piece of tech. It'll take us there. You're sure? Ed exhaled and walked to the structure's foyer, which was also a living room, and sat in a chair. I have no idea, Ricky. Here's the thing. We got nothing else, and it's going to be a long time before we can go anywhere near the USA without our people gunning for us. They were about to use the static of a war to make sure we never came back from Russia. You know, the more I think about it, the more I realize they never wanted us back. This war, this is them covering their asses, Ricky. The war is our fault. No, I mean, they're using the opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. Too much is going on. Too many agencies. They're leaning into logistic gaps for a variety of chicanery about now, and giving us the heave-ho is just convenient. Ricky swallowed and nodded. I have some money in the banks there. That's all. I cannot disagree. So I say, let's see what this thing can do. Also, wow, it's already feeling warm in here. Very efficient stove, said Ricky. They removed their outdoor garments and commenced to removing the siding from the external walls. When that was done, they found a crowbar of sorts in the room in the form of a fire poker from the stove. This was an excellent tool to jimmy up the wood all around the cabin. Surprisingly, whatever the reflective metal beneath the wood, it was near impossible to scratch. The siding was not attached to the reflective surface. Rather, it was attached to wooden infrastructure behind and additionally braced against the floor and the ceiling. A few boards were all that was necessary to pull a huge swath of infrastructure down. They spent the better part of a day getting just the siding done in the upper level, not to mention the walls mounted in their circular fashion to separate bedrooms, the bathroom, and the office. It was lucky whoever was managing the place left eggs and water in the fridge, or they'd have had nothing to sustain them over the time. Demolition tends to be easier than construction, but they were being careful, improvising tools, and there were just two of them. Finally, they were at the point that they only needed to get furniture out, and whatever was under those tarps in the basement, which happened to be a conglomeration of science equipment that looked distinct. It was probably worth a fortune somewhere, but it was just a thorn in their side now. Still, Clever Ed and Ricky managed. Eventually, they were at a point when all that was left were several beds, a bit of sheetrock, and associated infrastructure put in place at that external spiral portion of the home facing east. It had been filled in, that section. The cabin had become a metallic, reflective, mirrored metal drum. There were windows and skylights around it. These were blocked up with cloth. They had glass on the outside. Ed and Ricky just wanted to make them opaque. You think that will affect the whatever it is? Ricky asked, pointing to one of the windows. Ed shrugged. Doesn't matter that much. It's not like we're going to be able to go to town and buy a mirror to fill the gap. Then he stopped for a moment, looked at Ricky, and said, Oh, why not? Ricky was compelled to point out, Well, we did not leave the car running. This prompted Ed to sit down wearily in surprise and let loose a lexicon of expletives. Finally, he wound down and said, Well, I guess it's just a 10-mile walk. I forgot too. Ed looked around at their handiwork. Let's hope something happens then, he said. We should probably wait until morning. In the book, it's best with the most direct sunlight, but we're facing due east, that portion of the house is. He indicated the closed-off bit they were standing in front of. It was the back of that closet Ed had seen in the first room. We should get some sleep then, Ed said. It's still pretty warm in here. They had yet to remove the beds from the structure, so they agreed on refraining until the morning. The following morning came quickly. Because they were breaking into the outside, they put on all their warm clothes first. The front door was inaccessible behind furniture they had dragged out, and there were several blunt instruments they intended to use against that particular portion of infrastructure that had been filled in. It would be a matter of minutes to clear it. Clever Ed had finished off the remainder of eggs, cooking them over the stove in the morning and splitting the result between himself and Ricky. The kitchen island seemed to be part of the infrastructure of the place, so it had not yet been removed. They ate right off the green countertop, plates having been cast out front with the rest of the furniture. It's astonishing how much work can be done in a short time when you're determined. Ricky said, You know, Ed, if we can't make it back to the U.S., I have family in India. Oh? Well, a few cousins. I've not seen them in over 15 years. Not since grandmother passed away, but we had fun as kids. They would help us if only for a little while. Might be something to think about, Ed acknowledged, wiping a bit of egg from his mustache. I know a few folks in Chile. There was a percussive crashing sound from the front of the house suddenly, and this totally abridged Ed's thought. Is that a bear? Ricky stood automatically, holding the iron poker he had ready to break down the sheetrock like a sword. Course it's not a bear. How do you know? We're in a Russian forest. Because it's winter, Ricky. They're all hibernating. Some bears wake up in the middle of hibernation. Ed tapped his chin for a second, standing and grabbing his own fire poker. It's probably not a bear, he reiterated. A shaft of light burst through the middle of the portion of the house that comprised the cinnamon roll wrap near the front door, blocked off and excavated furniture. With the walls torn down and the siding removed, the space seemed smaller than it had been, and you could see everywhere at once. An arm burst through the sheetrock. Ed said, "See, told you it wasn't a bear," then ran to the arm and hit it as hard as he could with his fire poker. There was a squeal and a shriek from the other side. Ed got out of the way quick, and it was a good thing he did because somebody had a firearm and used it percussively against the sheetrock, blowing a number of holes through it. The bullets ricocheted. They did not impact the metal walls, not even to make a dent. There were sparks, and Ricky ducked quick. The screams continued, coming from outside the Russian space yurt in the woods. A voice could be heard saying, "Suck it up, Rufus, they'll fix you." Ed was on the metal floor, and he put two and two together. He cupped a hand over his mouth, yelled out, "Hey, Skeeter, you'd have helped us in South Dakota. You wouldn't be stuck in the middle of Siberia right now." "Very funny," a voice with a twang called back. "Definitely Skeeter," Ricky muttered to himself from the island, and an anger came over him he did not expect. A man who is kicked between the legs with no chance to reciprocate tends to hold a grudge, whether or not he intends to. Rufus had apparently listened to Skeeter as once again fists were beating on the painted exterior sheetrock closing off the opening. A huge chunk of it came away and Ricky saw red. He didn't remember standing. He didn't remember jumping over Clever Ed or diving through the hole and catching Rufus at the knees. He didn't mean to knock the skinny, dark-eyed, bald man against a table where his head was impacted enough to throw Rufus into a seizure. His target point was Skeeter, who was shocked into missing one of the easiest shots in the world, but it became a moot point, as abruptly the whole area started to shake. "Ricky, get back in here!" Ricky had gone mildly berserk with the iron poker. As Skeeter missed, Ricky only managed to hit the black-eyed man once in the knee, causing him to stumble. "Ricky!" Ed yelled again from inside. Ricky huffed, bared his teeth, then jumped back through the opening. "I guess we know who let the car die," Ed remarked. But neither man had time to be glib much longer. The cabin began to shake even harder, and now the ex-FBI men felt themselves gently pressed toward the ground, the same way as one feels when going up in an elevator. From inside the dacha, this is what the scene looked From outside the dacha, this is what the scene looked like. Two men, Skeeter and Rufus, were grunting and moaning just beyond the uneven portion of the structure's spiral. Behind them were piles and piles of siding, broken furniture, and other infrastructural components where they had been dragged just beyond the front door. Surrounding the space were numerous dune-like drifts, some of them as high as a man. Abruptly, the entire structure of the dacha began to grow in size, lifting up off the ground, vibrating the furniture on the ground, and causing snow to seep in the vacated space where it had been. The cabin was lifting, and the mechanism lifting it were 4 pistons that were about 2 feet in diameter and looked bird-like from a distance. They had a length of perhaps 50 feet, but this wasn't immediately apparent. First and foremost, the cabin had to shakily pull itself from its foundation. As the structure trembled, remaining sheetrock closing off the space facing the sun buckled and fell away, letting sub-zero air and incongruously bright sunshine straight through. Abruptly, the inside became as bright as the sun. Ricky shielded his eyes and fell back. Clever Ed said, "Let's get to the basement." They sprinted to the spiral stair in the center of the now empty upper level. Below, the jagged stone in the center of the basement had begun to glow a soft violet color, and the warmth that had defined the upper level before yet remained. From an exterior vantage, the cabin continued to slowly lift itself from the ground. Skeeter managed to wrap his arms and legs around one of the 2-foot-wide pistons, gradually extending from the center of the dacha. Rufus tried to do the same, but couldn't get his injured arm around, made a screeching noise, and fell. As full light entered through the eastern-facing slit to the side of the door, the cabin fully stood. The legs had pushed themselves downward from the middle of the structure, leaving the basement to hang below like the abdomen of some yurt-shaped massive insect. There was a joint in the middle of the legs like a knee, and the cabin actually pulled itself from the foundation, stepping into the snow. Rufus wasn't fast enough and got crushed in a gory spectacle, blood splattering a certain distance before transforming to dust, leaving a confusing conglomeration of clothes and what appeared to be ash behind. Even the green sphere of wicked putrefaction that rose out of him looked disoriented. Skeeter cursed dead Rufus as he gripped the leg that jerked jarringly under him. He had to give it all the strength he had. Once the dacha had freed itself from the ground, it began to wobble run through the trees toward the sun, kicking up a terrible din and beginning to make a deep bass roaring sound that caused even Ricky and Clever Ed on the inside to cover their ears. Skeeter, gripping the jointed leg of the structure for all the rotten life force in him, began to shriek in counterpoint. Faster and faster the circular dacha moved through the trees, intent on some unknown point in the center of the sun, crushing massive conifers as it went, slowly rising to the point where it was just above the treetops, legs like great pillars tramping through, bits of wood trim attached to the outside as camouflage, falling off incrementally, soon revealing the true alienness of the structure beneath. "Sir, what do we do?" Ricky yelled above the din. "The hell would I know?" Clever Ed snapped back. Both had crawled under the central stair and had their hands over their ears as the stone of the basement glowed in flickering spurts that were brighter and brighter. It was not centered, which is perhaps how human designers may have installed such a thing. Rather, it was to the front of the cabin, or at least, if one were to draw a line from the bottom level to the top, it would be right under the portion of the spiral structure that jutted out and faced the sun. Outside the structure, Skeeter grit his teeth, incidentally chipping another. He barely realized he'd spit it out as he pulled himself up the leg toward the opening, but he couldn't make it far. Abruptly he felt a force pulling at him from behind and realized the cabin had begun to turn itself in a circle above the trees, and it was going faster and faster and faster. Skeeter gripped the metal leg harder than ever, a terror deeper than anything he had known washing through him like electricity. Ed and Ricky were similarly drawn by the spinning motion to the edges of the structure. Now something else happened. There was an uneven tremble to the machinations of the Baba Yaga dacha. Sunlight coming in through windows and skylights restricted pure energy from suffusing the stone in the basement. It was spinning like an engine that wasn't firing on all cylinders. It was uneven. It was shaking. The circular arcs it described weren't uniform as it turned faster and faster, knocking over trees and discomfiting a number of birds crazy enough to winter in Siberia. The entire structure began to glow white-hot. Strange indigo light radiated all around from it, and in another instant it was gone like a reflection from a pool as one passes by, leaving only violet-tinged madness in its wake.